Hello and welcome to another episode of Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. I'm back and I'm COVID-free this week, so I hope you can understand me better. The availability of safe, fresh drinking water will become a pressing issue, a more pressing issue as the climate crisis progresses. Drought will reduce supplies and extreme heat is going to increase demand for water. And across the planet today, 785 million people do not have reliable access to drinking water, and as many as 884 million are without safe drinking water on an ongoing basis, according to the World Health Organization and UNICEF. We've made progress bringing water and sanitation services to an additional 1.4 billion people since the turn of the century. That's since 2000. But there's a long, long way to go to providing safe drinking water for all of the people on the planet while leaving enough fresh water for the rest of nature. And our guest today, Rich-razgaitis, started FloWater, a maker of water refill stations that can purify local water, allowing people to refill bottles safely and quickly. The company also sells reverse-osmosis purified water in recyclable, reusable aluminum bottles and a faucet filter attachment. Rich described the company as a part of his mission to save the planet. And you can find out more about FloWater at www.drinkflowwater. That's all one word, drinkflow, FLOWATER.com. Welcome to the show, Rich. How are you today?
Doing great, Mitch. Thanks for having me on the show as well.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. And you guys are working on a really important issue that a lot of folks, I don't think, are really cognizant of, and that is our access to clean water. I wanted to start off by asking you to talk about how Americans do in general with keeping hydrated and getting access to clean water that doesn't include lead, arsenic, and microplastics. What's the story?
Well, Americans, as it turns out, according to all of the data, does just about as poorly as the rest of the world as it relates to daily drinking water and hydration. So if you look at the statistics, about 70 to 80% of Americans are chronically dehydrated. And that's actually a very similar statistic, and it's almost identical as you look across the globe. So, one takeaway is that we just simply do not drink enough water. And if you look at all the benefits of being properly hydrated, in fact, if you're going to the doctor for any variety of ailments, if you could CPT code for water, it would be the first $1 trillion drug, because every doctor would really start with that, and, diet, exercise, proper hydration intake. And so there are enormous benefits that can be generated by simply drinking enough water, everything from immune function support to digestive disorders, and the list just goes on kind of infinitely. And then the second follow-up to that really is, well, why aren't people drinking more water? And one of the reasons is that there are a lot of tasty, tempting, tantalizing alternatives that capture your dopamine receptors through the form of carbonation and sugar and caffeine. And so that's kind of the issue as it relates to every food and beverage, I suppose. But the other very simple reason is that Americans, and we're focused primarily in the United States initially, we will end up building and bringing FloWater to the world. But part of the fundamental issue is that Americans don't like and don't trust what's in their tap water. And, right. It's interesting when I think about, oftentimes people say, hey, what is the problem here? Like, what is the problem with tap water? What is the problem with single-use plastic water bottles? And if you first start with a problem with tap water, the problem with tap water is not, is something like, if I could only find a faucet to fill up a vessel. That's not the problem. Sure. I mean, every American is, within feet generally of a potable water source. The problem is that they don't like what's coming out of that faucet. And so we could dig in a little bit more to that, but that's the problem first and foremost that we're trying to solve for, is to get people back to the tap. Because if you don't like what's coming out of the tap, then you reach for alternative sources. And we have reconciled this and validated this through many sources of data, which is when you get people a product that they love, and this is a truism in any category, any consumer product, but if you get someone something that they love, they'll do more of it and they will do less of the other things. And so our mission is Number one, really based upon the fact that we believe everybody deserves access to clean drinking water that they can trust, and to provide that through available tap water sources via a FloWater device. And primarily that's a refill station. And then the second is to get them hydrated again.
Well, and unfortunately, they do tend to turn to bottled water, single-use plastic bottled water, which research has shown consistently contains microplastics. And we're finding microplastics in human bodies at autopsy now, too. Should Americans be thinking about the safety and cleanliness of their water, even though we all hear and I think believe that we have one of the best systems in the United States, but one that's very fragmented? There are 160,000 different water systems in the United States.
Well, you just hit the nail on the head in terms of the kind of secondary problem, and it's a significant problem, which is that, okay, so Americans don't typically like or trust what's coming out of the tap. And a lot of times they just say, well, I don't, it doesn't taste right, or it doesn't smell right, or whatever it is. What they're describing in somewhat abject and qualitative terms, what really is the byproduct of that is what we have been dumping into tap water and municipal tap water over a period of many decades. So in some instances, that's something as simple as high sulfur content or a higher chlorine content, which is a contaminant, and it's a disinfectant, but it is also a contaminant, and it's one that you would prefer not to have in your water, but it's a necessary one to be able to transport water from municipal water systems safely to the household. But what you ultimately would like to do is to remove that. And so it's interesting that you reference that you're seeing it in autopsy reports, because you're also seeing it on the whole other end of the life cycle at birth. So there are tissue samples that have been taken now out of umbilical cords and placentas, and they are finding microplastics in human fetal tissue and umbilical tissue. So we're now getting this kind of permeating our lives in the average from a very early age, but it is also happening throughout all of our age. The average American drinks or eats and consumes about 1 to 2 credit card pieces of plastic every week or two. So we're now literally, when you're drinking bottled water, you're now literally drinking your bottled water. But the converse is true as well. And this is what's one of the surprises to some people, is that you're drinking microplastics even when you're drinking tap water or you're eating certain food sources. And so this is the huge problem. There are on average 300 microparticulates of plastic per liter of water in both bottled water and also in tap water now.
So how does the FloWater refill station work? I know you're using reverse osmosis, and it relies on local water sources. Tell us about what it does and how you use it.
Sure. So what we've developed is a roughly 6 foot tall, and 18 by 20 inch wide and deep piece of hardware. And in that piece of hardware is a very sophisticated purification system that does fundamentally one of three things. The first thing that it does is it removes contaminants from tap water: pharmaceuticals, herbicides, pesticides, glyphosate, heavy metals like lead, and it extracts up to 99.99% of that from the water. The second stage, and the system that we use to do that, is a variety of filters as well as purification systems, but commonly known as reverse osmosis, and it's our form of RO, which we call advanced osmosis, which processes up to 5 times faster, 5 times more efficiently than conventional RO systems. The second one is a re-mineralization and really revitalization of that water. So when you remove all of those contaminants from the water, you also remove some of the vital elements of electrolytes, calcium, sodium, magnesium, potassium, trace minerals that you actually want, that help not only the bioabsorption of that, but also helps activate cells throughout your body and certainly makes the water taste better as well. And so that's the second stage, where the water gets passed through a variety of different remineralization and electrolyte filters that also increase the alkalinity of the water. And then the third one is purely for taste. So after that water gets refined and revitalized, it passes through a coconut carbon filter, which doesn't make it taste like coconut water, but it ends up imparting this really clean, crisp, Fiji-like taste to the water anywhere that the source water is coming from. And so what comes out is FloWater from any tap water, potable tap water source. And so you could have high TDS content of 700 parts per million in Phoenix, Arizona, which is very common TDS level in the southwest portion of the United States. And it will taste just like the freshest, purest water if you had a spring in your backyard.
So you're also tuning the water.
Tuning the water. I love the term. I've never actually heard or thought of it in that sense, but it is a bit of tuning of the water and then standardizing it across the board, regardless of what the water source is. Now,
you're doing filtering. How frequently does the station need to be serviced as a result of all the filtering you're doing?
About 70% of our customers we change the filter and purification system once a year. And then based on volume and usage, there's certain high volume locations where we might need to change it more than once a year. But the majority of people, it's once every 12 months or 12,000 gallons.
Now, your focus is on office and public installations like schools and so forth. But one of the things that occurs to me as you're describing this is the question of whether or not you could also reuse greywater from the facility that your device is in. And I know that wouldn't be, for instance, sewage, but could you process water that had been used by the washing machine or the dishwasher in an office for reuse in order to reduce the actual consumption of water by the organization?
Well, that's an interesting idea. I think that there will be a day where we start to do that. In fact, City of LA is doing that with sewage, as you probably know, and they're turning greywater into their municipal tap and drinking water. Doing that on kind of a gridded system, very effectively, kind of like solar ended up going out into microgrids, and houses will end up going into microgrids as it relates to water, doing kind of a whole system reclamation. I think will be in the future more common, over the next 10, 20 years. One, to do so now, could the system handle it? Yes. I mean, you could hook a FloWater system up to a pond, and literally what would come out is fantastic drinking water that is free of contaminants and tastes like something that was just pulled out of a spring in your backyard if you had one. It's not graded to do that. And certainly there's a different set of kind of high throughput filters and purification components that would be necessary in order for it to be able to handle that. So that's one issue, which is, it's designed for using standard tap water sources. And the second one really ends up becoming more of a psychological one, which is getting, in fact, I remember looking at a technology almost 10 years ago in Asia when I was traveling throughout Asia. And it's not uncommon now, but it was a technology that simply was it was basically a dehumidifier. It was a dehumidifier that would take water from air, the moisture from air, and turn it into drinking water. And it's an interesting concept. It's an interesting technology. It's made a little bit of progress, but one of the common issues with that is that A, it's very slow, but B, there's a big consumer hurdle with drinking the water from the air in which you are breathing and expelling and everything else. And it creates a bit of a psychological hurdle. And so I think over time that'll become more commonplace. The big opportunity right now is try to solve for the 70 to 80% of Americans that just don't like what's coming out of the faucet. And that's been our first and foremost problem to solve for, is how do we get people to fall in love with tap water again and to start to drink more water on a daily basis and less of the sugary, carbonated, caffeinated alternatives.
So it's great to hear you're thinking about that forward-leaning issue, because I do think we're going to need to start to reuse more of the water we're using today. Now, how much does the refill station cost, and what's are there service fees involved in owning one?
Typically, we either sell or lease the equipment. I would say about 70% of the people, the customers that we work with, which are commonly hotels, schools, gyms, corporations, municipal locations, fire departments, police stations, essential businesses. About 70% of our customers end up leasing the equipment. When they lease it, it's a little under $150 a month. So for less than $5 a day, an office, gym, corporation, school, whatever it is, can have access to unlimited FloWater on demand, zero latency, for essentially the cost of a latte at your favorite coffee shop. We will sometimes sell the equipment outright as well. We typically the rack rate on that is around $8,100 per unit. And then there will be some concession given if there are hundreds of units that we're selling to a school system, for example. Most schools end up having CapEx budgets. And so as a result of that, they have bond funds to pay for one-time purchases. But for the most part, most other companies and customers end up leasing the equipment. And then there's a one-time delivery and installation charge. It's a pretty easy setup. It takes about an hour to do. There's no significant drilling. There's no drywall. There's no cutting. So it's a very simple install that can be dropped into almost any location within a couple hundred feet of a water line in less than 60 minutes, typically, not always, but typically. And then from there, it's pretty nominal maintenance. We've designed these to have a 10 plus year life. We've been in business for 8 years. We have most of our very original first 100 unit manufactured FloWater units are out in the market today, sitting not too far from me in San Francisco. And they require generally once a year filter changes, which range from $300 to $600 per filter change. So it is if you look at the expenditures on bottled water or soda, coffee, tea, a lot of these offices, when we install a FloWater unit in a corporation, for example, we'll see on average a 50% reduction in soda and coffee consumption. So if they're providing that stuff for free, it's a no-brainer, because by installing a FloWater unit, what ends up happening is people fall in love with it. They drink more of it. They get rehydrated. They drink less of the other stuff because you can only fill up your stomach with so much stuff. And it ends up having not only a great health impact and a sustainability impact, but it also has a really positive economic impact as well.
Now, one of the issues that we always like to ask about is how do we get this into underserved communities? And I know you have a fundraising program for schools, for instance. How does that work? And are you working with philanthropies and others that might be interested in financing access to this kind of service in urban communities where there's not a lot of good access to water or food?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll answer that really in three parts. One is that we have done a variety of projects directly and indirectly with various partners. And so I'll send you a link after the show, but we did a project with Dig Deep, which helps provide wells and provides water infrastructure to underprivileged communities, where we helped deliver to a school, kind of a medical center in the Navajo Nation, about half a dozen FloWater units. And it was the first time, and I believe the school super said it was the first time in 5 years that they had had any access to any drinking water that they could use, both for feeding and nourishing kids, as well as delivering medicine. So I'll send you a link to that. That's an example of some of the stuff that we've done. There's other things that we've done in donating FloWater refill stations to schools that are in underserved communities that helps fulfill our mission of everybody deserves access to clean drinking water that they can trust. We also work with organizations like the Rob Machado Foundation. So Rob Machado works and purchases FloWater refill stations at various points throughout the school year to deploy these into school systems through his own nonprofit. And we've done that with others as well. And so those are about three different ways that we've worked. We'll continue to do that effort. If you have any suggestions as well of any charitable organizations with whom we could work, because as a small and growing company that has grown considerably over the last 8 years, but also is still a small company, we're able to do a a part, but it's a single part, and it's a dent in the overall kind of puzzle. And the more people that we can get rowing in the same direction and supporting and certainly contributing if they feel so inclined, the faster we're going to be able to solve this problem, getting people access to clean drinking water that they can trust, and particularly in and including underserved areas.
Now, we will certainly, and I'm sure our audience will as well, send some ideas. The other thing I wanted to ask about, because we're running short on time here, is how do you see people's experience of water changing? And particularly during COVID, we're seeing lots of interruptions in supplies. There's certainly a change in the way we interact with everything that we do regarding our food and contact with people. The refill station has a hands-free refill experience. Do you see the pandemic as starting to change people's perception of the importance of access to basic services like water?
For sure. It's been pretty interesting to see how the last 2 years have changed some of the dynamics of our business as a B2B company. Of course, we saw that firsthand, where going into the pandemic, 50%, almost 50% of our business were big corporations,
right,
tech companies, and many of those people are working from home. And what we ended up really doing was, in many ways, rebooting where is the problem that we can best solve in today's new marketplace. And one of the ways that we ended up solving significant problems in migrating our business was particularly to schools. And so you see this in spades in schools, where anywhere a business or a nonprofit or a public entity is required to or needs to provide water, the water fountain is a huge problem. It was a problem going into the pandemic. I mean, it's, archaic, it's gross, it's slow. People are slobbering over it, and you're filling your bottle in the back. It has a bottle filler in the back. It's providing essentially unfiltered at the most. Bottle filling stations and water fountains have a single stage filter in it that removes a little bit of the sediment, removes a little bit of the chlorine, but it does next to nothing as it relates to removing total dissolved solids. Glyphosate is still in there. Pharmaceuticals are still in there. Chromium-6 still makes its way through there. And so you don't get to extract any of that through a conventional water fountain in almost 99.9% of the circumstances. And so what we saw is an absolute boom in our business. Our school business is probably amplified by 5 to 10x. And we've deployed, I think, well over thousands of units in the last 15, 18 months into school systems nationwide, not just in California, not just in Colorado, not just in Texas, but nationwide. And the reason for that is, A, people don't want to touch things. And so we have a touchless system. B, people, administrators, faculty, students, parents of students, they want their kids drinking more water. I mean, this is one of the best things that you can do to boost your immune system, is provide yourself proper hydration so that you can flush toxins out and your body can work on its own. That is really a fundamental truism to one's health. And so getting people access to a system where clean drinking water is essential has been a pretty significant change in the pandemic as a result of the pandemic, because I think before, when we started the company 10 years ago, I mean, really almost 10 years ago, about 8 years ago, really, if you looked at water, kind of water hardware was seen as water hardware was seen as water hardware. It was very much kind of a commodity in the sense that people would look at it and say, hey, it's a black box water cooler, it's a white box water cooler in my office, it's all the same. And it's not all the same. It's all the same in that kind of old school mentality, because all of those units basically do very, very little to redefine tap water. What we're trying to focus on doing, and what we're seeing as a result of the pandemic, is that people genuinely care. And some of this is very obvious. I mean, they care about sanitization, and they care about not touching things. That's very obvious. But what is perhaps less obvious, but is more kind of growing consciousness, is that they care about pharmaceuticals in their tap water. They care about glyphosate that's making its way into tap water, or viruses and bacteria, and that's becoming much more prevalent. And what I think I'm most excited about when I look at all of the data and the pre-post after we deploy a FloWater refill station into a school, into a hotel, into a gym, into a fire station, is that when a customer has a FloWater refill station, in their location, we will see on average a 50% reduction on soda, a 50% reduction on coffee, a 50 to 80% reduction in other sugary, carbonated, caffeinated drinks, and an 80% plus reduction in single-use plastic water bottles. And at the end of the day, what matters most is behavior change. So if we can see people, and by the way, I probably missed the most important statistic, which is we'll see a 2 to 5-fold increase in daily hydration just after we install a FloWater refill station for a period of within weeks and months that happens. And so if we're getting people to drink more water and they feel safe doing so, and they're properly hydrating, and we can do this for less than $5 a day, we see that as an impact that is our responsibility to amplify to many, many millions of people across the globe.
Well, I can see an evolution underway that's similar to, you mentioned solar before, which is the microgrid or power generation at the edge of the network. And I can certainly imagine FloWater devices being placed in a lot of places where we don't currently think of water filtration as necessary over the next 5-10 years. How can our listeners learn more and maybe give FloWater a try?
Well, the best thing that you could do is send us an email or DM us on any social media handle. So at Drink FloWater, or you can go to the website www.drinkflowwater.com, and then you can request more information. That will go to one of my trusted colleagues within the organization, and they'll reach back out to you to talk to you about whether we might be able to do a free trial for you, depending on where you live, or get you started with effectively a risk-free contract. And so you also could possibly see it at any number of our 7,000 plus locations throughout the United States and try it. So if you're interested in trying it before you actually buy it as well, if you contact us at Drink FloWater on www.drinkflowwater.com and send out a form, we can direct you to some location that's a public location in your locale where you can try FloWater for yourself.
Well, Raz, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk with us today.
Mitch, thanks a lot for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
We've been talking with Rich-Razgaitis. He's also known as Raz. He's the founder and CEO of FloWater. You can find out more about FloWater at www.drinkflowwater.com. FloWater is spelled with one W, not two. Drinkflowwater.com. Folks, water and how we use everything we use is going to become a more important concern in our daily life. So we urge you to think about conversations like this and to share them with your friends, family, and strangers on the street. Everybody needs to be thinking about more ideas so we can produce less waste and use the resources that we have on this planet more judiciously. We run through Earth's natural resources by the end of July of every year. And so we're essentially consuming half a year's resources from the future. It's time we start pushing that date, the Earth excess date, back towards January 1st so that we are not using more than the Earth can provide. This is Earth911 Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. We'll be back with an innovator interview soon. In the meantime, folks, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.